Since most of the funeral party followed us home, the flood of people was almost instant. I was kind of glad because that didn't give my mom any time to yell at me for what I had said in my speech and my breakdown. I was also a little put off because I hated being around so many people. Luckily, due to my smeared makeup, I was able to hide in the bathroom fixing it. It only occupied me for about 10 minutes, however. By the time I returned to the banquet, my house was filled with people all dressed in black. The chatting was like a loud rumble that wrung my ears, like the loud hum of a machine. I waded through the crowd looking at the faces of people that I didn't know. Most of them were older adults around my mom's age. Some of them were family members, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. All of them were from my mom's side of the family. Neither my dad nor anyone on his side had showed up. Sad. I spoke with a couple of my relatives, but the conversations were more than unpleasant. Just like with my mom, I didn't get along very well with her family. My grandma and grandpa lived in Crystal Creek as well, but since they were incredibly judgy, I avoided them. "Why do you always wear black? Why aren't you going to college? When are you going to meet a nice boy? Really, how about when are you going to die?" Then there was my Aunt Jean. She had went to Yale when she was my age, and was always acting superior, even to my mom. So when the sisters were together, they were always having a dick measuring contest. It was super annoying. Luckily, Jean lived in Los Angeles with her husband and two snooty little kids, so they weren't around a lot. Scott, her son, used to hit on me a lot when we were kids. When we got older, he got creepier and obviously looked at my ass or down my shirt. I'm sure he had to, since he couldn't never get a girlfriend because he was such a douche. Still, it was disgusting. We were cousins. Marie, her daughter, was an aspiring model and actress, so she was constantly calling me fat, saying how bad my makeup looked, or commenting negatively on my goth wardrobe. I was not goth. I wore a lot of black, but not only black. Dark colors just looked best on me. On the flip side of the snob coin, my mom's brother Nicholas was the exact opposite. However, he was just straight up strange. He lived in this small house on the edge of town alone. He didn't come around a lot or talk much to us. He was the youngest of the family, but had no children, and had never been married. He claimed he was Wiccan, but I swore he was actually involved in some sort of cult. I'm not sure, but he was about as opposite from his sisters as he could get. My whole family was just a mess. After a terrible conversation with my aunt about the fact that I didn't want to go to college, I managed to escape to a corner in which I found Shane. "Well," I said, standing beside him, "this sucks major ass." He snorted. "So far, I've been approached by your grandma wondering why such an old person was shacking up with a kid. Your cousin, the weird boy, asked me if I ever saw Hunter with her clothes off, and your uncle, not your biological one, but the one your aunt is married to, just chatted about sailboats." I tried not to laugh. "Sounds about right. I also heard a group of women your mom's age commenting on my butt." Shane was blushing. I giggled at that. "Also sounds about right. The women in this town are serious cougars. Most of them are all married, but the ones that aren't are dating guys in their 20s. The ones that are married just dream about being that way." He shivered. "Too young for the friends, too old for the family," he murmured. "Just ignore them. They're all snobby assholes." He thumped his head back against the wall he was leaning against. "How is it that such a horrible family can produce two wonderful girls like you and your sister?" I blushed, unsure of what to say. He just smiled at me, obviously happy that he made me flattered. Then I realized. "Hey, have you seen Dorian?" I asked. He squinted at me. "No. Your mom didn't invite him." His mouth was a hard line. "I did." It turned to a frown. "Why? 'Cause I like him?" I shrugged, unsure why that was a big deal. "Ozzy, you don't want to associate yourself with guys like him, trust me." I just squinted at him, still confused. "Hunter did. I couldn't necessarily read his face, but I caught a glimpse of pain. I wasn't sure if it was at the mention of her name, or at the thought of her relationship with Dorian. "What?" I asked boldly. "Nothing, Ozzy." He rubbed the back of his messy head of hair. "When's dinner?" I looked at the clock. "Like 15 minutes, I think. Mom said that the cooks were still preparing stuff." He nodded. "This is just all so excessive. Don't be fooled, it's not for Hunter. Mom likes to put on a show. She likes the attention. It's almost sickening. Her daughter just died. She should be mourning." "This is her way of mourning." We were silent for a moment. "Has she cried?" he whispered. I didn't answer right away. I was speechless as I stared through the crowd at my mother with her arms slung over Tiffany as they laughed with their friends. I shook my head. "Not that I've seen," he sighed. "That doesn't really surprise me." I don't know if I've ever seen her cry. I paused. When I was 7, I got really sick with something. I don't remember what, but I was in the hospital for like a week. This was before she and my dad divorced, but not long before. I was a little kid and I was super scared, but she stayed with me every day. She slept on the other bed in the room and never left. I remember her hair was all scraggly and she only had a few changes of clothes. My dad told her to go home. He said he'd stay there, but she refused. She wanted to be with me, to make sure I was okay. I could feel the tears swelling against the edges of my eyes. I sniffled. Now my sister's dead, and she couldn't care less. Shane tried to touch my shoulder, but I stepped from his attempt. The doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I whispered, leaving him behind. Somewhere nearby, a loud clap of thunder sounded, and the sound of heavy rain beating against the roof followed. The doorbell rang again, wanting to get out of the shower. "I'm coming!" I called to the front door. I popped the latch and pulled it open. Standing there, damp from the fresh rain and smiling like an idiot, was Dorian. I couldn't help but grin at how goofy he looked. Unsure of what to do or say, I just murmured, "You're late." He laughed. "I decided to walk," he replied. He looked around at the rain pouring down. "Bad idea, but got here just in time." "Didn't you see the dark clouds at the funeral?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, I'm apparently not very smart." I couldn't help but laugh. He brushed his damp hair from his eyes. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" he asked. I hadn't exactly been blocking the way, but I didn't think much of it. "Sure, come in?" I waved at him. He took a step inside and took a breath. I shut the door behind him. "You made it just in time. We're about to have dinner." "Ooh, perfect." He hummed with a tinge of something that I couldn't quite pick up on. I looked him up and down. "You, want to take your jacket off? It's a little wet." He glanced at himself. "Probably would be a good idea." He unbuttoned the buttons, stripping from his black overcoat before handing it to me. Underneath, he wore a tight white button-up shirt with long sleeves. He handed me the jacket before proceeding to roll up said sleeves, exposing his pale arms. He straightened his tie and smiled. "Much better." I smiled, hanging the jacket on the coat rack. I could see his muscles a lot better like this. He had them, but they weren't too big. Basically just perfect. I could also see that he was a little thinner than I had originally thought. He brushed back his damp hair. "I feel ya!" The old annoying voice screamed out at me. I sighed, turning to see what my mom wanted. She was approaching me, with Tiffany in tow behind her. She looked between my new friend and I. "Who is this?" I opened my mouth, but suddenly Dorian was pushing past me with his hand held out. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Dorian Blackwell. I was a really good friend of Helena. I'm sure you saw me at the funeral," he said in the kindest, most adult voice ever. He was a bit older than I, but he seemed to have this social stuff down to the T. Meanwhile, I was awkward as fuck, stammering over my words and saying dumb or weird shit to cover my anxiety. He grabbed my mother's hand and shook it. "You must be Rebecca Grant. It's a pleasure. I've heard a lot about you." My mom seemed taken aback. She blinked at him. "Oh, Maya, yes, Mr. Blackwell, that is I," she stammered. Actually fucking stammered. I'd never seen her that shocked. Dorian released her hand and looked towards my mom's blonde twin. "Who is this lovely lady?" he asked in a semi-seductive tone. Tiffany fucking blushed. She pushed my mom aside. "I am Tiffany Tyrell." She grabbed his hand before he could even say anything. I had never seen her fawn over someone more obviously than she had done with Dorian. Dorian shook her hand. When he released it, he stepped back towards me and draped his arm over my shoulders. I shivered, feeling tiny beside him. "It is nice to meet both of you ladies. I have been getting well acquainted with your exquisite daughter here." That's when I fucking blushed. "I invited him," I muttered. Mom didn't even look at me. She just said, "The more the merrier," and smiled. Tiffany kind of moaned. "Merrier indeed," she hummed. Dorian squeezed my shoulder. He simply raised his eyebrows at the blonde. "Well, Mr. Blackwell," Mom started. "Please call me Dorian," he interjected. She smiled. "Dorian, dinner is about ready. Join us?" "Of course, Mrs. Grant." "Rebecca," she corrected. She turned to move towards the dining room. "Rebecca," he corrected low. The dining room table had been set up for the immediate family, while the guests were to sit at the tented tables outside. Somehow, however, Dorian managed to get him a seat there with me. He had engaged with my mom until she offered him to sit with the family. Our 12-space table was filled to the brim. On one end my mom sat, and Jack at the other. To my mom's right sat Tiffany. She was always allowed everywhere my mom was, even if it meant special privilege. Then Grandma and Grandpa, then Aunt Jean and her husband. On the parallel side of the table running from Jack's right to my mom's left was Maxwell, then Scott, Marie, Dorian, then me. Uncle Nick had decided not to sit with the family, and Shane wasn't considered such. All the attention from my mom's side of the room was locked on the handsome and somewhat exotic Dorian. She, Tiffany, and Marie all seemed taken with him. It made me more than uncomfortable, a little annoyed and slightly jealous. "So, Dorian, how long did you know my daughter?" my mom asked, taking a bite of her rare steak. He grinned at her. He tapped his chin. "I met her about a year after she moved to New Orleans," he answered. "Have you lived in Louisiana long, or did you move there from somewhere else?" "I have lived there for a very long time." "New Orleans has never seemed like a place where babies are born and raised," Tiffany blurted. "It always seems like it's a home by choice." Dorian just squinted at her, looking confused by her stupidity. "I assure you there are babies born there." She giggled, realizing how dumb she sounded. "Oh, of course." She cleared her throat. I tried not to laugh at her foolishness, but a tiny giggle escaped. Dorian glanced at me and smiled. "So, Aunt Rebecca," Marie interjected. She crossed her legs and leaned forward, closer to Dorian. "Have you gotten any other donations for the scholarship? I've been trying to talk my mother into forking over another grand, but you know how she is." Mom's lips turned into a hard line. "The mayor has pledged 1,000 for the scholarship," she answered. "You run a scholarship?" Dorian asked. Mom smiled at him. "Well, not yet. I'm establishing a scholarship foundation in Helena's name. I hope to have it all ready by the time the year's seniors are ready to graduate. I want to have enough to issue it out to more than one person." "Are you now? How much have you gotten so far?" 4,000. I want to give 2,000 to each winner." Dorian just smiled. "I'd be willing to pledge 2,000 to your charity." Mom blinked, shocked. "You would?" "Of course. I'll find you after dinner and write a check." "Can you afford that?" I whispered up at him. He grinned and nodded at me. "Wow, Thank you, Dorian. That's our largest donation." So generous of you, Marie hummed, leaning closer. Yes, he is, Tiffany agreed. I felt her bump my foot in an effort to touch his. I sighed. It was weird that everyone was flirting with him. He didn't seem to mind, but still he didn't flirt back. He just kind of ignored any come on the women made, and instead he would beam his attention on me. That made them both jealous and frustrated. It made me happy and smug. Still, by the time dinner was over, I was more than ready to escape. When everyone was finished and they all flooded into the living room to mingle, I bailed. I took solace alone on the middle of the stairwell. I watched them through the railing. I liked being alone, but at the same time I was a little bothered by it. I was almost lonely, which was weird for me because I loved being alone. It was so weird that everyone was just ogling over Dorian. My mom usually hated everyone I and Hunter hung around. She said they were bad influences, though in truth they were just like us. Mom couldn't even stand Shane, and he was a good, stable guy with a job. I didn't understand what was so different about Dorian. The only conclusion I could really come up with was she was completely won over by his charm. And that was something no one else I had ever met had. As for the other two, they just thought he was hot. Tiffany was a serious cougar, and since she looked young anyway, any of the guys she dated didn't really mind. Her dates were usually in their mid to late 20s. I don't really think I had seen her date anyone over 35. It made sense that she'd hit on the new 20-something hot guy from Louisiana. Marie was just as bad as Tiffany, though she was at least in the age range. She had been notorious about hooking up with guys. Though she lived in an entirely different part of the country, whenever she came down, she had a bad habit of screwing the guys in the area. She'd even slept with one of Hunter's boyfriends a few years back. It was pretty gross. She was annoying. All of them were. Hey, his voice called to me. What are you doing over here, sitting alone? I looked at Dorian as he moved up the stairs. He plopped down beside me. Avoiding my family, I admitted. He laughed. They are a little intense. And some shameless flirts, as it would seem. He rolled his eyes. While I was speaking with your mom, your cousin kept staring at me and grabbed my ass. I slapped my hand into my face. Of course she did. I sense that she pulls this often. Frequently. He shook his head. It doesn't surprise me. You know, I think they are a little jealous of you at dinner, though. I squinted. Really? Why do you think that? Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I was trying to include you in the conversation. Every time I addressed you, though, the girls would make faces at you. For some reason, I giggled. I could feel my cheeks blushing. I want to thank you for that, I whispered. I don't get included a lot. Well, that's something I want to change. My face grew hotter. Oh, Thank you. He smiled at me. So, did you really write my mom a check? I really did. Why? Well, I wanted to get on her good side. For one, I also wanted to support something honoring Hunter's memory. I glanced down at my knees. I think it's really nice of you to do that. I know you really impressed Mom. He cocked his head to the side. Did I impress you too? I bit my lip. Were you trying to? I asked. I avoided eye contact with him. A little bit. The way he said it was so confident and smooth. I wish I could be that way, but at that moment, any bit of confidence had fled me and I was reduced to nervousness. I blinked rapidly, trying to think of something to say, but once again, he had reduced me to a bumbling idiot. Ozzy, I have a favor I need to ask of you, Dorian said seriously. I don't know if he was trying to change the subject because I was clearly nervous or what, but I was glad for the distraction. What, Dorian? Shane made sure you received all of Hunter's old things, correct? I nodded. Yeah, they're all up in her room. Is there any way that you would allow me to look through it? I squinted at him. Why? He took a breath. There are a few things of hers that I would like to have to remember her by. If it's something you want to keep, that's fine, but I have a few things in mind. I blinked, unsure of how to answer. Without thinking, I finally stuttered out, yeah, sure. He smiled. Great. I would have asked Shane before he sent them here, but as you can see, he and I don't really get along. Of course. I understand. I stood up. Come on, I'll show you where her things are. Dorian followed me upstairs and into Hunter's poor, pitiful room. I hadn't been in there much since she left. Her departure had left it a shell of its former self, a wreck of items deemed not important enough to go with her strewn across the room. It was left behind. Kind of like me. With the return of her boxes of items, it had become a state of even more disarray. It was kind of sad. I looked around and sighed. I haven't been in this room since she died, I murmured. As Dorian passed through the door, he paused to touch my shoulder. I'm sorry I drug you in here, he uttered. No, it's fine. Just look around. I moved away from him and plopped down on her bed. He looked at me sadly for a moment before opening up a box and beginning to dig through it. I looked around at her old posters, CDs, books. I remembered when we were kids and I would pile in her bed with her and we would sleep cuddled together, keeping one another safe from the monsters. I glanced over at the dream catcher that hung above her window. If a monster comes to get us, we just have to close our eyes, cover our heads, she had told me as I cuddled next to her, shuddering. He won't be able to get us if we ignore him. The dream catcher will trap him, preventing him from getting us. When the morning comes, the sun will disintegrate him, and he'll never be able to hurt us or anyone again. She was always so much wiser than I had been, even if she hadn't been much older. I sighed. This room doesn't have to make you sad, Dorian said. He wasn't even looking at me, but he seemed to know. It just sucks that I won't be able to make any more memories here, I whispered. Then you need to remember the old ones. I blinked at him. I know. Have you ever lost someone before? I hadn't meant to blurt that, and I felt stupid after having done so. Dorian just smiled at me. I have. Oh? Who? He pushed the box aside and moved on to another one. My mother and brother. It's so sad. If you don't mind me asking. How? She died giving birth to him, but he didn't make it either. He looked like he wanted to say more, but decided that it wasn't the best idea. How old were you at the time? 12. I was lucky. I got to know my mom. A lot of kids at the time couldn't say that. I squinted at him. What do you mean? He cleared his throat, twitching slightly. Just that there are a lot of children who never got the opportunity to know their mom. I nodded. I get that. I'd rather not know mine, I joked. Dorian looked at me seriously. You don't mean that, Ozzy. I sighed. No, I don't. She used to be a good mom. I don't think she remembers that even though you're grown up, that a girl still needs her mother. There are just a lot of things that parents are meant to teach their children, and it goes beyond childhood. It doesn't seem to me that when she had your brother, she figured that you and your sister didn't need her as much. He was the baby, so he needed the attention. You and Hunter were older, so you could take care of yourself. That wasn't true, though, was it? You still needed her. For a lot, and being the oldest, Hunter had to step up and take your mother's place for you. But who was left for her? You wonder why Hunter ran off and left you for a man when she wasn't even of legal age. But she had grown so much, and she had become an adult long before her time. I just blinked at him. How did you... I'm intuitive. It's a gift. You're a lot smarter than I expected. He snickered, smiling at me. What, did you think I'd be stupid? I scratched my arm nervously. I hadn't meant to offend him. No, I'm surprised. Dorian stood from his crouch position and moved from the box. Calm down, Ozzy. You didn't hurt my feelings. He smiled. Did Hunter tell you that's how she felt about me? She didn't resent me for taking her childhood away, did she? He grabbed my arm. She didn't tell me that. And she didn't resent you. She loved you. I just know because I was somewhat in the same predicament as a kid. He seemed to say it slowly, as if he was unsure if he wanted to tell me that or not. You were? He shrugged. When my mom died, I had to take care of my little sister. She was only 4. My dad was so hung up on grief that he just didn't know what to do with himself. He locked himself in his room with books and did his research and such, trying to occupy himself. We were rich, so we had a nanny, but a nanny can't provide the love that I thought I could for my sister. I tried to give her a normal life. That is so sad, I squeaked out. He smiled at me, and I didn't love my sister any less for it. He glanced around the room quickly. Anyway, I didn't find what I was looking for. He seemed irritated at the idea. Did Shane keep it? I don't know. Then I remembered. Oh, Shane gave me a box of stuff that he thought Hunter would want me to have. It's in my room. I haven't gone through it. I couldn't make myself. Dorian's face lit up. Can I have a look? Yeah, sure. I waved for him to follow me. I led him down the hall and into my room. My room, I thought at the time, was a pretty normal teen room. The walls were dark purple, the carpet was white, but covered with a large black rug. The blinds were dark in order to keep out the sun. The walls were covered in band posters. My bed was full size and covered with a thick red bedspread, a ton of throw pillows in all colors, and a couple of stuffed animals. I had a brown wood desk pushed in the corner that was covered in paper scraps with miscellaneous words filling them. They were pieces of rejected fiction I had started and changed my mind on. A few mediocre drawings accompanied them. My sticker-bombed laptop sat in the center. A big, black, puffy desk chair was shoved up against it, barely fitting. In the parallel corner I had a 32-inch flat-screen TV, atop a stand that also held my Xbox, and several dozen green cased games to accompany it. Near my window sat my bookshelf and CD rack, both stuffed full, along with a stereo. The room itself was strewn along with dirty clothes and trash. Dorian paused in the doorway, taking it all in. He smiled and started to chuckle. What? I asked, partially offended. It's just... the angst is practically palpable. He snickered. I stared at him, my mouth agape. Hey! He shook his head, waving at me as if to brush it off. Hey, Ozzy, I get it. You're young. It's okay. Young! I gasped. You're not that much older than me. What, like 4, 5 years? He blinked at me for a moment before that cute, childish half-smile overtook his countenance. Yeah, something like that. I growled in semi-frustration, waving over beside my bookshelf. The box is over there. He just laughed at me before moving to where I had pointed. Dorian knelt down and started to dig through it. I sat on my bed and watched him. After tossing a few of Hunter's shirts out, Shane was apparently dumb because I wasn't skinny enough to wear her clothes comfortably. He pulled out a black wood box. He smiled at it as if that was what he was looking for. What's that? I asked. What's that? I asked. He glanced at me before plopping down beside me. This is your sister's jewelry box, he said, opening it. On the inside, there was a collection of studs, hoops, and dangle earrings. He took that tray and handed it to me. I sifted through them, but they were all a bit too plain for me. They didn't look like anything Hunter had worn before she left. I didn't expect I'd want anything else in that box, but Dorian tapped on my shoulder. Ozzy, look at this, he said. I glanced over to the thing that he held in his hand. It was this tiny little metal circle with what looked like thin metallic webs woven inside of it. A ruby rested on one side, and a long metal chain hung from it. It was a dream-catcher necklace. I felt my heart swell. This was her favorite necklace, Dorian said. She wore it constantly, never took it off. I could feel tears attempting to leak from my eyes. She said that it protected her from evil. I covered my mouth, trying not to cry. Hey, you okay? I just shook my head. Aw, come here. Then his arms were around me and I was being held against his chest. I held my breath, trying not to cry. I just wanted to get a hold of myself. It took me a few minutes, but eventually I was able to pull away from him. I rubbed my eyes. I'm okay, I whispered. He rubbed my back. This means a lot to you, obviously. I never saw it before, but she taught me to see dream catchers as protective. He grinned. It's true, they are. He motioned back towards the tiny little metal object. I think she'd want you to have this. You do? Yeah. If this was something you shared with, then it's obviously something she'd want you to carry on. Dorian touched my shoulder. I looked him in his sea eyes. I think you should put Hunter's necklace on and never take it off. He whispered low. The way he said it was so strange, but I didn't really think about it at the time. I didn't argue his words or dispute it. I just accepted it as it was. I won't take it off, I repeated. He slipped a large chain over my head. It hung low between my breasts. Dorian gently pulled my hair out from under it, allowing the necklace to rest as it should. There you go. I blinked, touching it slowly. It was strangely warm under my fingertips. Dorian smiled at me. It looks perfect, as if it was made for you. His smile grew to a grin. I looked down at it and smiled. Thank you. He handed me the box of remaining jewelry. I didn't look at it, though. I just returned the drawer and earrings and closed it. I sat it on my end table. I didn't find what I was looking for, but that's okay, he said, smiling, because I found what you were looking for. I blushed slightly. This man was just confusingly, charmingly sweet, and I didn't understand it at all. I think it's about time I get going, though. It sounds like the other guests are leaving. I didn't really hear anything coming from downstairs, but I didn't debate. A part of me wanted to ask him to stay, but another part of me would be glad to be alone. I'll show you the door, I whispered. Downstairs, it turned out Dorian was correct about people leaving. Only a few guests lingered, and those were only my mom's closest friends and the most immediate of my family. Jack was standing at the door telling one of his friends goodbye. He turned towards us and shut it behind him. Leaving so soon, Mr. Blackwell? He asked. Addressing Dorian. Dorian smiled. I'm afraid so, Dr. Grant, he replied. Well, it was good meeting you. Jack moved to return to my mother. And you, Dorian glanced at me, smiling a wolfish grin as if to say, I got him right where I want him. I just shook my head at him, smiling back. I grabbed his overcoat from the rack and handed it to him. He put it on slowly and moved towards the door. I opened it for him. I bit my lip and asked what I had been afraid of. Will I see you again? Dorian cocked his head to the side, examining my face. He was trying to read me, and when he saw what he was looking for, he just smiled. Are you afraid you won't? I crossed my arms, feeling defensive. Not in the slightest, I said, my voice strong in false confidence. Dorian just chuckled at me. I think you will, Ozzy. I sighed, trying not to make it sound like it wasn't in relief. Dorian wasn't fooled, however, and his smile grew. Good night now. He took a step outside. Good night, Dorian, I whispered. He offered me one last glance before walking away. I slowly shut the door behind him and leaned against it in odd exhaustion. My fingers snaked up my body and found my dream catcher. I sighed, taking comfort in its cold steel.